Absolutely. Well, I want to say hi to everybody. As you know, I was doing nonprofit work for 20 plus years, and I was the director um, of the legal clinic at the Iowa Coalition Against Domestic Violence for almost 13 years. And I knew from then that I could not obviously move without the support and the work that you all do as advocates. You are the best at pushing and making things happen for your clients. And I know that we are bossy, but you are more. so, so that helps us to stay true to the representation of our clients and to be aware and conscious of the barriers that they're facing every day. And we appreciate very much all the work that you do on behalf of survivors, and how you support and uplift the work of fighting for justice on behalf of immigrant survivors. So with that, I also wanted to say hi to Shelby. Shelby is a rock star and never says no, which is a bad thing to tell to an advocate because now you're going to be bombarding Shelby. But Shelby, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Shelby Bird. I've been an attorney with law office of Sonia Parras for almost 4 years now. For a year and a half before that, I was a clerk here. And I work with all the immigrants in our office on all the different types of cases, but I specifically work more closely with the family law side of the firm, as well as the removal defense and immigration court side of the firm. But I also work with our victims of and benefit side immigration as well.
Shelby and I are always available, to any of the questions that you may have on specific cases, even if you have no attorney and your client doesn't want to take on a case. But if you have any legal questions, feel free to contact us. And also, we wanted to mention that we help once a month, and we held an immigration-free legal clinic every first Friday of every month with Luna. We have been doing this for many, many, many years, and we try to do our best to be available, provide legal advice, refer women survivors to nonprofit organizations if they have a case, and we have a special low bono program to take on some clients that may be able to afford our services. We also take some pro bono cases. Right now, we are handling about 20 plus trafficking visas pro bono. And Shelby and I run to court often to do protective orders. So we're here to help you. And with that, I wanted to talk to you about more help. There is more help. How many of you, Jocelyn, I don't know if you can see the little manitas, right? But how many of you know of the Alliance for Immigrant Survivors? I don't know if you can see Jocelyn, and you can tell me if they're raising their hands in the chat box.
Yes, we have 1, 2. Maybe people are trying to find where to hit raising hands. Yeah, we have a few.
Okay, excellent. So the Alliance for Immigrant Survivors, they're all our friends, it's Cecilia and Rosie and Grace organizations. They're amazing. And they have built this alliance to strengthen their legislative advocacy power and policy advocacy power, and also to inform nationwide without replicating services and efforts. The latest on working with immigrant survivors. I love their name. If you pronounce it like I do, I call it ICE, right? And ICE is, as you know, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. So it's the counter ICE, right? Which is the Alliance for Immigrant Survivors. So anyways, they're an amazing resource, a force to be reckoned with. And I would advise you to always go to their website to also here and see about the latest. One of the things that they told me is that they're gonna need all of your stories in the field, in the ground. So I know you are working with a lot of survivors that are facing barriers, and we're gonna have a lot of times for story sharing. You do not want one more thing on your plate, but it truly makes a difference when we are shaping policies and changing laws. So if you see anything coming from the Alliance for Immigrant Survivors, please help out. What we're doing today is three things. We're gonna ID those policy changes, executive orders that were raining on us in January and February. They're welcome and we hope to see more. So Shelby's gonna talk a lot about that. And then I'm gonna talk about what are those opportunities for potential immigration reform. What does it look like? What are those? And how this affects or impacts your work and immigrant survivors. And at the end, we'll just do a quick strategies and what else you can do to uplift and support immigrant survivors and answer your questions. So, Shelby, if you want to take it away.
Absolutely. You can go to the next slide. So President Biden signed many executive orders on his very first day in office, some of those actually directly pertaining to immigration. So the first executive order that I want to mention to you all is that he rescinded, in an executive order, he rescinded one of President Trump's January 2017 executive orders, which drastically increased the interior immigration enforcement. So under this January 17, 2017 executive order, everyone was a priority to ICE. It did not matter if you had no criminal record or you did have a criminal record. Everyone was on the same playing field, actually. And in the past, under President Obama and other presidents, you had seen more of a focus on enforcement when it came to violent criminal offenders or people who were a national security risk. But under President Trump and this executive order, everyone had become a priority for ICE. So President Biden, what he did was he withdrew that. He revoked that executive order, and it's designed to reset enforcement within the United States in line with national and border security, addressing the humanitarian challenges facing the United States and immigrants, ensuring public health and safety, as well as safeguarding the dignity and well-being of families and immigrant families.
So this is important to you because our survivors have been bombarded by their abusers for the past 4 years with, if you move, if you do this, if you don't do this, I'm gonna deport you. And for some of our survivors, that became a reality and they got arrested and they got deported. So I think it's important as advocates to educate our community through social media, flyers, support groups, virtual support groups actually with COVID, right? To ease a bit the stress of the heightened policy on everybody is going to be detained and removed that is no longer into effect. So Shelby, question. We heard some stuff about 100 days pause on deportation. What is that?
Right. So another executive order, or part of the executive order that President Biden signed on his first day, was he tried to create a 100-day pause on removals that would start effective no later than January 22nd of 2021. However, not surprising to most attorneys and advocates, there was litigation and a lawsuit filed by the state of Texas saying that should not be allowed, and a judge in Texas has paused that executive order and stated that there is actually no current pause on deportations. And that will be in effect until at least February 23rd, 2021, so that they can have more briefing with the court. So yep. There's a lot of confusion about that right now, but currently there is no pause on deportations. So if you know of a client or you have a client who has been removed recently, please seek help of of an attorney or a legal resource as soon as you can, because there may be things that we can do to protect that immigrant while this is pending.
Absolutely. So we have a lot of noise also from Texas filing an injunction and litigating the issue. So what you need to remember is that if anybody is arrested right now, there may be hope for some fight while before there was not, and that you should seek legal advice on behalf of your client at once. There is also a really, really cool memo. Shelby, do you want to talk about that NTA, the 2018 memo really quick?
Right. So in 2018, a memo was signed that allowed USCIS, so United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, to refer cases to the immigration court if their application to become a resident was denied. This put a lot of people at risk of being put in deportation proceedings, and it also put a lot of stress on people applying for their residency, because if there was any chance that that residency could be denied for whatever reason, that immediately put them at risk of being put in immigration proceedings. So that has been rescinded now. President Biden rescinded that. So we should no longer see USCIS working in conjunction with ICE to put people in removal proceedings, which as an attorney is amazing. It's a huge weight off the shoulders of both the counsel, the legal counsel, and the client, because that risk of being put in removal proceedings is not there simply because the case was denied.
Excellent. Alrighty. And so what are the new enforcement priorities? Because before with Trump, everybody was a priority, right? And that has changed as we were talking before. So just briefly, what are those priorities now? Who should be super worried?
Right. So there's three categories of priorities at this point that we that President Biden and the new executive orders have stated. So one is people who are a national security risk, which that has never changed. That's always been the case. If you are a national security risk, you are always at a top priority for ICE. Also, people who have recently attempted to enter and who were not present before November 1st, 2020 are also a priority for ICE. And lastly, those incarcerated in federal, state, or local prisons or jails that have been convicted of an aggravated felony offense. Now, that sounds like it would be something outrageous or a huge criminal act. However, under immigration law, there are some pretty simple crimes that fall under the aggravated felony. So that's something that will need to be looked at carefully if you have a survivor or you have a victim who has a criminal history. DHS and ICE were supposed to release their priorities and how they were going to implement and execute this list of priorities. However, they have not done that yet. So we're anticipating that we should be getting some kind of action or notice from DHS and ICE how they plan to implement this new enforcement priority list.
And so, Shelby, there has been, again, we said that briefly before, there has been some noise about the impact litigation on Texas. How worried do you think we should be about that?
As far as the 100-day deportation ban?
Right.
So at this point, it is the rules of the game hasn't really changed much yet because it's not paused. Deportations are not paused. So our hope would be that lawsuit and that litigation gets dismissed, or immigrants and their advocates and their attorneys win that fight, and they can actually put a pause on the deportations. However, at this time, we don't have that. So I think that is something that we will watch more carefully. And when that February 23rd deadline kind of rolls around, we'll be watching that to see if there's any movement on that and if they actually do pause the deportations.
So I just wanted to highlight something, while we see what is happening with the litigation in Texas and the moratorium. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of action with the COVID in terms of ICE going places and arresting people. But one of the things that I wanted to highlight is that if you're an advocate and you're working with survivors, you should encourage as much as possible document gathering and prepare survivors for a potential arrest as we are moving in between the old administration and the new administration, and always strategize with women that have been deported in the past. And I'm going to make a pause in here, and Jocelyn, maybe this is something that I can send to you at the end of the webinar, which is a special number. If you have clients that come with immigration papers and they have an A number that is followed by 9 digits, you can call a number in and find out if the person has been removed in the past. And this is important because your client may be at risk of an arrest and swift removal. And the number is 1-800-898-7180. We will give you the information later, but bottom line, continue the documentation gathering and empowering your client through information and checking immigration status through that phone number if your client is in removal proceedings or has been in removal proceedings. Lots of movement also, Shelby, with travel ban, no?
Yes, so President Trump rescinded the travel ban, which was extremely discriminatory against Muslim Muslim majority countries and African countries. So it reopens visa applications impacting the nationals of, I believe it's 10 different countries. And we also are hearing that it's possible that denied visa applications will potentially receive reconsideration, but that is unclear as to how or when that might happen. There's also not been any mention of the diversity lottery winners from those countries who have been banned. So we anticipate some guidance on how that will be addressed and whether it will be in the future.
All right. And then, Shelby, we heard so much about asylum. A lot of our advocates are represented and are working, I shouldn't say representing, but are working and supporting efforts of asylum seekers, gender violence. And there is some movement too about people that are at the border and people that are asylum seekers. What have you heard about executive orders relating to the border?
So the Department of Homeland Security announced that it would be suspending all new enrollments in this program called Migrant Protection Protocols, or MPP, also known as the Remain in Mexico. So under this policy, we saw immigrants coming to the southern border, trying to enter the United States and apply for asylum, and they were being turned away and sent back to Mexico while they waited for their hearings. Actually, yesterday, while I was listening to another webinar about some updates, we heard that that we will begin allowing entry for those currently waiting for their hearings under MPP, but the entry will be slow to the point of potentially maybe allowing 300 people a day. They will be COVID tested. They'll have to run through some other screening, but it does sound like we are going to, that the Department of Homeland Security and President Biden are trying to allow those people who have been under that MPP program and stuck in Mexico, oftentimes in very poor conditions, allowing them to come to the US while they wait for their asylum hearings, which is considered a huge win for everyone down there, because it was a very bad program.
Right.
Sonia?
Right. Yes.
So I want to remind you of two things. So one, we have a question on the Q&A and I'll read it here for you. But the second is, Shelby, if you can talk a little bit slower for the interpretation.
Yep.
That would be awesome. Thank you. So the Q&A, it says, can you please give some examples of crimes that ICE considers to be aggravated felonies?
Yeah.
All right, Shelby, your favorite question.
So there's obviously the big crimes. So murder, rape, sexual abuse of a minor, drug trafficking, crimes that would be a felony in criminal court as well. However, under the immigration definition of aggravated felony, we also see simple battery, depending upon the sentence, being considered an aggravated felony, as well as some fraud or tax evasion crimes when there's money involved. And sometimes as well, theft. So it's really important that if you have a conviction or you have a victim or a survivor who has a criminal record, that it gets examined and evaluated carefully, because some of those crimes that would be a simple misdemeanor or a serious misdemeanor in the state of Iowa or even under federal law could actually be considered an aggravated felony for immigration purposes. So everything has to be looked at carefully and examined carefully, because immigration laws are a little different than the criminal and federal criminal statutes.
So Shelby, can you please highlight just one case scenario, right? And how you would advise your client if you're an advocate and you're working with a survivor that has been committed public benefits fraud and has been receiving benefits that she's not entitled for, you know, fraudulently, being lying in the application, and maybe it was even unbeknownst to her that she did not qualify. Now she's racking up a $15,000 on public benefits. How would you analyze that? What would you advise advocates to do in those cases?
So if you have a client or you have a survivor or victim that you're working with who has a pending criminal charge, especially for something like the accidental public benefits, so say they got unemployment benefits on accident. They were not aware that they didn't actually qualify for it, or they somehow misrepresented themselves on an application for it. If they are being charged with the crime in relation to that, it is really important that they have, one, a criminal attorney who can help them, but two, that also an immigration attorney reviews those charges so that we can work with the criminal attorney to potentially have them plead down or fight that higher charge to something that will not prevent them from having an immigration benefit. Unfortunately, when you are found guilty, you are convicted of an aggravated felony, and your time to appeal that decision has passed, it can really, really cause problems and bar you from having any type of immigration remedy or benefit in the future. So that would be my recommendation. If we have clients that have criminal charges pending, we work with the criminal attorney to make sure that whatever they could, if they are not willing to lower the charge so they can plead to something lesser, or if the prosecutor is not working with them at all, we have to work with the criminal attorney to try to fight that so that they do not get convicted of that crime that would bar them from any kind of remedy.
Okay, do we have any other questions, Jocelyn, at this time?
Yes, there is one, and I think it's based on your previous slide, Sonia. It is, so they are essentially bumped up because the offender is undocumented?
No. So the crime is the criminal case in Iowa or federal, that typically, actually every time, their status does not make that a higher crime. What happens is immigration laws have this category called aggravated felonies. It's a bad term for it because the word felony always makes people think of an actual criminal charge. What we're talking about is immigration has a category of crimes that they say if you've been convicted of something under this umbrella, then you're considered a person of not good moral character, basically. So it has nothing to do with their status making them criminally higher charged or charged higher in criminal court. There's just a higher standard for good moral character in immigration law. So they have to make sure that that crime they committed or were convicted of does not fall under that sweeping category of aggravated felony in immigration court or immigration law.
And I would describe it for everybody in general. Imagine that you're running a race, right? And in order to get to the end of the line and gain immigration status, you or a defense under immigration law, you're gonna have to jump through a certain number of hurdles. Those hurdles, you can see it under the law in the Immigration and Nationality Act on Section 212A. And Section 212A mentions a lot of issues that can trip you and make you fall and not make it to the end of the line. One of those is being convicted of an aggravated felony. And like Shelby saying, that is not aggravated felony as defined under Iowa law, is what immigration understands and interprets it to be. And that's why if your client has been arrested or detained and that's it, and is not a U.S. citizen, you should seek immediate legal advice to ensure that as the criminal case is developing, your client doesn't end up being ineligible for life or forever and deportable, ineligible for immigration relief and deportable. Some of the exceptions to that rule is U visas. But as we know, we're waiting now forever and ever to get out of those ones. So anyways, I hope that answered the questions. We're gonna move along, and then we'll have a time at the end for questions and answers as well. So, so Shelby, question for you. At the border, Trump had a zero tolerance policy. Everybody was prosecuted and everybody was deported, as many as possible. Has that changed?
Yes. So the new policy or the new executive action relating to entries at the border is that they have to make a case-by-case determination. So blanket policies that make everybody ineligible to come to the United States are against basic principles of what it means to be American. So at this time, it'll be a case-by-case, person-by-person determination as to whether or not they get to enter the United States and apply for asylum.
Excellent. Talk to me about DACA, Shelby.
Right. So as everybody I'm sure has heard, DACA is back and is fully reinstated. So the courts, before President Biden was even sworn in, the Supreme Court decided that the rescission of DACA by the Trump administration was unconstitutional. So it was reinstated through the Department of Homeland Security. What President Biden did was stated in an executive order that the Department of Homeland Security has to take all actions to affirm and protect DACA, meaning that they can't make determinations or make decisions that would harm DACA or change it. So new applications are being accepted. Grants can be made in 2-year increments. They had tried to lower that down to 1, but it's back to 2, and advanced parole. So if you have DACA, you can request to leave the United States with permission and enter again with permission for brief periods of time. That is now reinstated as well. Further, there had been a deferred enforced departure that has been reinstated for Liberian nationals until June 30th, 2022 with an employment authorization. So with both of these programs, some survivors or their children may still be eligible. So it's important to screen the survivors as well as their potentially undocumented children, because they may now qualify. They may be old enough now to qualify for DACA.
That's right. And so, Shelby, if I have DACA, can I apply for something else, or do I have to, or am I stuck with DACA and I'm not eligible for like a U visa or for immigration reform?
So if you have DACA and another benefit arises, you are absolutely allowed to apply for that benefit. DACA does not preclude you from being eligible for something else that you may qualify for in the future or at this time. So we're anticipating that there will be some hopefully some additional reform, and there could be some new a new system that would allow everyone to become documented. And in that case, if you have DACA, you still qualify for that. It does not preclude you from doing that. Or if you marry a US citizen or a lawful permanent resident and you qualify to adjust to status of lawful permanent resident through them, having DACA does not preclude you from doing that.
Exactly. And so we heard a lot of things about asylum. There are tons, like executive orders and changes and reviews have been pouring down. So all that we've heard right now is all the executive orders that were activated or that were published on January. We're gonna move now through some of the ones on February. So just briefly, Shelby, because I know that we have a lot going on the asylum. What are the highlights on migration and asylum law?
Right. So before he left office, President Trump tried to sign executive orders and also put some actions in movement or in motion that would make it even harder to get asylum in the United States and place strong barriers against getting asylum. President Biden signed an executive order that stopped all of that, halted any of those from going into actually going into place. So we haven't really had any big decisions on asylum yet. The executive orders have rescinded some policies. It's calling for the rescission of others, calling for a great big overview of asylum eligibility, and also has called for some new regulations. So for the advocates, for all of you, a project is to work with survivors on continuing to empower and educate on gender violence and developing their skills to talk about their trauma and their domestic violence so that we can educate the court and so that they can go to the court and explain to the judge what happened to them and be empowered to tell their story and not afraid to tell their story.
So if you're doing, again, some virtual support group or you're working individually with women that have gender asylum cases pending that will end up perhaps, going to court and explaining their cases, any opportunities that you have for them to volunteer if they're no longer receiving counseling, to strengthen their political beliefs about women's rights and human rights, I think will help them at the time of the trial to present their point of view and their cases to the court. So I guess the challenge for us is, not don't see your clients just as survivors that need services, but also see them as leaders in the field of gender violence and leaders that can organize grassroots organizing of other survivors. And also when they have their day in court, they're presenting, strong political beliefs that will obviously help their case tremendously. Right, Shelby?
Right.
Okay, so regional framework of migration and asylum.
So President Biden has called for a focus group and for a review on what the root causes of immigration and migration to the United States is. And that includes a specific view on the Northern Triangle countries of Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, where we see a lot of migration from those countries to the United States, especially in the last probably 10 years. And he also is calling for a specific review of what constitutes sexual violence, gender-based violence, and domestic violence, and the need to combat those in those countries, as well as in the United States for those immigrants. It also is seeking a review of refugee resettlement to the United States, including a program for Central American minors and children.
Alrighty. And more news.
Yes, so he also has called for the orderly processing of asylum claims at the border. So there is an incredible backlog of asylum cases at the border, and it seems to only be getting bigger. And President Biden has now said we have to start processing these quickly and helping move that process along. He also has instructed that the Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, and the CDC and other agencies to review and determine whether rescinding the policies like communicable diseases, MPP, and the safe third country rules and agreements. So, as far as what it means for survivors and for victims in the United States, this is he's calling for a review of the eligibility requirements for asylum, specifically what it means for a particular social group, which is what most gender-based, domestic violence-based, and also gang-related violence claims to asylum fall under. And he's asking them to review the barriers to asylum for domestic violence victims and gang violence victims. In the last 4 years, we have seen a tremendous decrease in the amount of asylum grants for individuals who have been victims of domestic violence or gender-based violence, and especially gang-based violence in the United States or in their home countries. And President Biden is calling for a review of why that has happened and what barriers those individuals are running into before they can get asylum in the US.
Mm-hmm. There are lots of children separated from their families, and special emphasis on family reunification, right, Shelby?
Absolutely, yep.
Okay.
They've also stated that we kind of skipped over this earlier, but as of, I think earlier this week, all of the border wall construction has completely halted. There is no additional work being done, and all the construction crews are being pulled. So that is also a significant thing to note. Okay, so President Biden also has called for actual review and policy review for immigration within the United States. He's created a task force on new Americans. He's calling on the Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, and the Department of Justice to identify the barriers that are impeding people from accessing immigration benefits, and why that is.
So what would you advise advocates? Obviously, and Shelby, we did not make a difference or explain what is the difference between an executive order, which is what you've been talking about, right, and the legislative proposal. So are these executive orders in place now? Are they law? What are they?
Yes, so executive orders are declarations by the president that help guide how the government works, how the government acts. He can sign those. He does not have to have approval for those. However, legislation, the great big changes that we are hearing about are laws that have to be approved of by both the House and the Senate. So the president can suggest these things, can suggest his big immigration bill for 2021. However, he has to have approval from the Senate and the House of Representatives before that can go into place.
So what are the things that we can do, or how can we encourage our advocates to be supported during these times of transition?
Right. So it says to contact your local ICE head of office. So in Des Moines, that's Nathan Heyer. I think probably for most of the state of Iowa, he would be the head. But I would say if as attorneys and as advocates, if we have a victim or a survivor who is arrested, we need to contact him, explain that situation to them, and try to work with them on a case-by-case basis to protect that person and their rights. Further, we would recommend, and I think Sonia mentioned this, that AIS is requesting that people write down and share the barriers posed by actual ICE, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, in their community that prevents survivors from accessing remedies. So I know a lot of people are afraid that if they call the police because they are in danger, that then ICE is going to come, or that they're going to go to the court to get a protective order and ICE will be there. So AIS is working to compile those fears and those stories of why people aren't accessing help and remedies, so we can try to combat that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I would encourage everyone to do is to reach out to ICE and request a meeting with you guys. So it doesn't have to be, it'll be awesome if you call them to meet at your offices and 30 of you show up, right? It'll be awesome. But if you want to make it more productive, maybe 2, 3, 4 of you can request a meeting with the head of ICE just to coordinate, to introduce yourselves, to explain to Nathan who you are, where are you at, who do you work with, and the kind of survivors that you see. So that way you have some rapport and connection to ICE, and under their new priorities for enforcement, since survivors may not be, is not one of them. If anybody gets trapped in the net, you can quickly, just reach out to them. Also, if there are any policies that are harming your the clients that you're working with, and you have some specific concerns about a specific arrest or a specific story, you can just have that connection to them. Don't be intimidated. I know that you guys are pushy and that you are amazing at advocating. And I think this is a good time to reach out to them, introduce yourselves, and call on a short meeting just to go over who you are and what to do. So don't tell him that Sonia sent you, but we'll be glad to help you out to prepare for the meeting. So public charge review. Or are we not under this rule? And basically, if you're doing VAWA work, U visa work, T visa work, this doesn't apply to you and to the women and children that you work with because they're exempt, but it's driving crazy everyone else. So Shelby, where are we at with the public charge?
So the public charge requirement, the form and the requirement to show that you're not going to become a public charge to the United States, it is still being implemented. It has not been rescinded yet. So you still have to fill out the I-944 form. You still have to they will ask you a series of questions about that at your residency interview at USCIS. However, President Biden has asked for the specific review of this policy. So we anticipate within 60 days finding out whether this will be in place or whether they're going to completely rescind it. So it is still actively being implemented by USCIS, but it is under review.
And finally, civil rights executive orders. There are many and plenty, but some highlights, Shelby.
Right, so these civil rights executive orders could help your victims and survivors that you're working with. They are anywhere from advancing racial equity and support for underserved communities, advancing fair housing, reforming the incarceration system to end the use of private prisons, to reaffirming federal commitment to tribal sovereignty and consultation, and then to combat xenophobia against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, which has been specifically in the news this week as there's been a lot of hate crimes against Asian Americans and Asian immigrants recently in the United States.
And one of the things that this last piece does is direct HHS to consider issuing guidance, right, by describing what are the best practices to advance in this field. The piece on incarceration, unfortunately, is not yet applying to DHS or HHS, but hopefully, since the AG's office is directing DOJ not to renew certain contracts with private operated detentions, we hope to see all of a sudden, our local jails not having an incentive or a motivation to keep immigrant survivors or immigrants in general detained in their facilities, right? So anyways, well, thank you so much. Shelby, I know Shelby's gonna stick around to answer questions in a second, and I'm just gonna fly through legislative proposals. Let's see what is happening and what is being proposed. So In VAWA, we have standalone bills, and we're gonna hear more about it. But I just wanted to mention a few highlights, and this is like crossing my fingers. It should be heaven. We should be some release. As you know, we only get 10,000 visas approval per year. Is capped to 10,000, and it cannot be changed unless the law is changed, right? So that's one of the proposal, raising the cap and improving certifications, because we know that we have a lot of authorities right now that are denying or putting barriers of 5 years, like here in Polk County. If your crime happened more than 5 years ago, they won't sign your 918 Bs, etc. The change is gonna go from 10,000 to 30,000, and although we have right now more than 150,000 U visas in the queue, and we are getting approvals for the end of 1995, we know that 30,000 U visas will not do the trick completely, but will help us with movement, right? Um, this also will include the timely processing of survivor-based cases. Right now, a T visa is taking between 14 and 18 months. I-130's family VAWA, I'm sorry, I-360's VAWA self petitions are taking over 14 months. So we hope to see some movement in there, and also limiting the detentions of removals of survivors. We talk a bit about this, and this is why we're encouraging you to access to ICE now, right? Because as these things are moving, we can be feeding our friends that are doing policy advocacy with stories about how limiting detention and removal of survivors makes sense, at least for the state of Iowa. Um, so more changes and priorities for legislation, access to public support and housing, reunification of derivatives abroad. We have a lot of kids that are aging out and are no longer to be processed, and consular process is complicated. So we hope to see some movement in there, as well as eliminating obstacles for survivors who have other lawful status to obtain the survivor-based relief. So these are, again, like I said, VOW is kind of like the standalone piece that is moving. I'm a member of the National Legislative Advocacy Policy Committee, and I hope to hear more from you and to be in touch with you as we ask for help to call our representatives. Now let's talk about this U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021. I get so happy. I get so happy um, when I get to a chance to talk about this. So let's talk a little bit again, about how this will help and what is in there in the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021, and we'll talk about more things in general. But I mentioned this 30,000 race expands protections for workers, and also more protections for workers that may be at risk of immediate removal and that are seeking labor protections, including U visas. I know that, so I just want to make a page for this because I know that sometimes we focus so much on the domestic violence situation with the partner and the sexual assault, that we forget to ask some questions. So this is a pitch for all of you that know me and the work that I have done for many years with immigrant survivors that are victims of sexual violence and work-related crimes at the workplace. Please review your intakes and make sure that you're asking these questions, because sometimes there is no legal remedy anywhere else, and they're being victimized at work, and that's something that we can help them with and support them through. LPI is a legal provisional immigrant, and that's how they're calling it. They're calling Biden, who introduced this into law and is currently pending, has created this earned roadmap to citizenship for undocumented immigrants. So this bill will allow undocumented individuals to apply for temporary legal status with the ability to apply for green cards after 5 years if they pass, number one, criminal records and national security backgrounds, and number two, and this is tricky, pay their taxes. So if there is one advice that we're giving all of our clients and everybody that we're seeing is today, unfortunately, starts the tax season. And everybody should be consulting with tax preparers or people that can assist you and survivors in filing taxes, because if LPI was to become actual reality, they will be asking for taxes. I know that some of our clients are getting cash for their work, and they should still try to get an IT number, which is is an ID for purposes, the tax identification number. Preparers that help with taxes can request those IT numbers. You can also help survivors to get this IT number and encourage them to file their taxes if applicable. This is also going to help dreamers and TPS holders and immigrant farm workers who meet specific requirements and may be eligible for green cards immediately upon the approval of this legislation. And then after 3 years, all these green card holders who pass additional background checks can become or apply for citizenship. So it's pretty ambitious. We're looking at more than 100 million immigrants that could be benefited by this. One of the things that Biden is trying to do with this, as we know, our immigration system is broken. I know you heard it everywhere from every politician, but let me just give you an example. Right now, if a spouse, US citizen, wants to apply for another spouse that entered the country unlawfully, it's going to be at least 2 years until the consular process is finished, or 3 years. So that's just like the fastest way, right? And then we have the longest, processes, which are, for instance, brothers, US citizens that are petitioning for brothers. If you're from Mexico, you are going to be waiting for 20 years. If you are, for instance, the spouse of a local permanent resident, you may be waiting 4 or 5 years until everything is said and done. So what Biden is trying to do with this proposal is to clear these backlogs and improve the system. It also calls for recapturing unused visas, eliminating lengthy waiting times, increasing per country visa caps. We have countries that, people are not interested in immigrating and those visas are lost. And then we have countries that have to wait for 10 years because they don't have enough visas. So it's kind of like reviewing all those inefficacies of the system. It eliminates bars to residency, which is a dream come true. And we're not going to get into the technicalities, but you may be punished for 10 years that you had to wait outside of the country if you came in unlawfully into the country, maybe left and came a second time. So it takes care of all those bars and allows those with approved family-based petitions to join family members in the US. And this is something that we saw in the year 2000 with the Life Act. It reinstituted the Central American Minors Program. This is a program that was initiated under the Obama administration, whereby minors that were from Central American countries could come into the US and be reunified with their parents. Eliminates a 1-year filing deadline for asylum cases, and establishes designated processing centers so people can go to their countries of origin or certain places to register and be in the way of requesting asylum. increases diversity visas, and much more. So how can you help people that you're working with in order to prepare for what we hope is to come? It is very important that people start getting information about their own immigration history. And I will be glad to help Jocelyn, if you allow me, we can do a webinar on how to get the records of your client if they need to from the government. It's called Freedom of Information Act. And we also reach out to the FBI for fingerprinting. And we bring in everything that the government has for our clients. That allows us to see if our clients is going to be issues and may not be able to file for any status under this potential immigration reform because she was, I don't know, deported 5 times and now she's under one of the categories that is an exception to the reform. So we don't know what's to come, and this is the time to gather immigration history of our clients and not be rushing, when anything happens or something happens to get this information that is going to be vital to determine if our client qualifies. Collect continuous presence documents. I tell all my clients, get an envelope or a file. When you receive mail, just drop in there the envelope with your name and the date. If you pay a bill, drop now and again, drop one bill and leave it alone. If you use it and need it, is there. You don't have to go crazy around, the town and the state asking for documents. You have it in there. We talk about preparing the taxes because we know that this will be a requirement. Also, we have consulates in here, like, the Mexican consulate in Iowa that has the office in Omaha, Nebraska. So they do constant, they used to do, obviously with COVID, they're more restricted, clinics and mobile consulates to be able to provide their people with birth certificates and several documents, passports, etc. So this is the time to get several documents. Again, the kids' birth certificates, their own birth certificates, passport, marriage certificates, dissolution of marriages, because those documents are always needed when you're dealing with immigration. And then please don't forget, if you're giving your clients, it is safe for them to carry around your business card in the back. I know that Jocelyn, you should have this because we used to do this with you guys, and in the back of the card we used to write and imprint, I do not wish to talk to you, I want you to, or I'm a survivor of domestic violence or sexual violence, and I want you to reach out to my advocate or to reach out to my attorney, right? So to identify survivors that may be too frightful to share intimate information about their victimization that ultimately may help them get out of the jail or detention. Continue to do Facebook presentation, Zoom, advise your clients of notarial fraud and being victims of fraud, and help them to connect with nonprofit organizations that can review their cases. Don't forget to recruit and train volunteers, gearing up for what may happen in the future to support work on and legal clinics. So here's a truckload of very good resources, and you can always reach out to Shelby or I with more questions. And with that, we are at the mark of the hour. So Jocelyn, do you want to stay around and answer questions? Do you want to send them to us? We're open to any questions. And
Yes, we are able to stay longer as long as the participants have questions. About 30 more minutes, we have captions available and interpretation. So we do have some Q&A questions already, if you want me to start with those.
definitely.
All right, so the first one is, are there any efforts underway to get Biden to change the definition of aggravated felony, or is there anything we can do to try to influence that?
Shelby, do you want to answer that one, or do you want me to answer?
Sure. So as far as I know, there is not any specific part of the new bill that talks about aggravated felonies and a reformation of the definition. But the most important thing that we can do to try to influence that at this point is to work with the victim or the survivor or the immigrant to make sure that they don't plead guilty to one of those crimes. So what we see, unfortunately, is individuals will come to our office, they'll say, I have this charge or I have this conviction, or they'll come in with, because they just got married, and then we start to review their case and we see that maybe 5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, they pled guilty thinking that it was the right thing to do, or their criminal attorney told them you'll be safe, it's fine, and they actually fell victim to the aggravated felony. So right now, that would be my best recommendation for how we help or influence that. I don't know, Sonia, if you have any other ideas on that.
You know, the term aggravated felony was created under the Immigration Reform Act of 1997. It has been in the books forever. We have a lot of litigation around it, and I don't foresee that this term maybe per se eliminated or heavily changed under the Biden administration. I think that's something that we will allow through litigation, unfortunately.
Right.
So.
Right.
And then I saw that you were already answered one of the questions live. Do you want to, I can read it and then you can explain your answer, Sonia?
Sure.
So it is, someone is fleeing from domestic abuse from another country, has proof of the domestic violence from attorneys, judges, and is terrified of the abuser due to killing threats. Is there some kind of immigration remedy or hope for this victim?
Shelby, take it away.
So if they're in immigration proceedings with the immigration judge, we see this a lot in the past pre-Trump administration, individuals who had proof of that domestic violence and who could articulate to the judge their fear and the threats that they'd been under had been winning asylum. The last 4 years, that number has been getting smaller and smaller as they kind of restrict our ability to argue that domestic violence is a qualifying crime basically for asylum, or that they fall under that particular social group. However, President Biden specifically, as we mentioned earlier, has created or asked for the review of those policies that were creating barriers on domestic violence victims or gender-based violence victims from getting asylum. So we would absolutely, if they're in immigration court, file for asylum for that person and fight for them to get asylum and work with the law that we have and argue that their case is different from the law that doesn't work with what we have. So they can file for asylum and they should file for asylum. If they're not in immigration court, unfortunately, if all of the violence happened in their home country and none of it happened in the United States, if they're not in immigration court, there is not a affirmative or a benefit that they can apply for unless they're in immigration proceedings.
Any more questions?
Yes, the last one. Actually, I can't see it. Okay, the last one is, this may be beyond the scope of this webinar, but have there been any positive staffing changes in the EOIR with IJs yet? Curious if we've seen any biased IJs appointed by the previous administration. Yes.
Yeah, so EOIR stands for Executive Office of Immigration Review, which is the agency that oversees the removal cases. The IJs are the immigration judges. And what we saw under the prior administration is how there were a lot of judges appointed that were favoring, obviously, the I want to be very diplomatic, so that they were favoring the views of the prior administration in terms of processing immigrants that were unlawfully present. That is very diplomatic. I'm very proud of myself. So, having said that, obviously there were a lot of other judges that were just following the directions and the guidance from the Department of Justice. Since we have a new sheriff in town, we are hoping to see dramatic changes, and above all in the application of the chipping away of the asylum protections, gender violence protections that have been in effect for 25 years, and we see them eroded down to basically non-existing in the past 4 years. So we're hoping to see a lot of that eliminated that was imposed through executive orders and bad guidance from the Department of Justice. So,
and there's been some movement at the top of the Executive Office for Immigration Review, as far as like chief judges getting reallocated to different parts of the group of that branch. But as far as the immigration judges go, in like Omaha, that would be the judges that hear our cases. They're on the bench until they leave, or until they do something that is bad that would get them fired, which I don't know, Sonia, if you've ever seen anyone removed since you've been doing this, but
one. I've been doing this for 25 years. I saw one judge. It was so crazy that, I mean, yeah, one crazy judge. That was it.
And then one last question, and we will get ready to end the webinar. It is, are there any collaborations, trainings, or information sharing from immigration lawyers with Iowa public defenders so they stop telling immigrants to admit guilt? That's a good one.
Yeah, so there's actually a position at the public defender's office in Polk County, and it's a former immigration attorney and advocate who took that position. She helps them in like the public defenders make sure that they are not pleading guilty to a crime that could harm them via immigration reasons. And then other than that, if you have a survivor or a victim who is in criminal proceedings, feel free to reach out to our office. We can speak with that criminal attorney just so that they either can work with us to help figure out what crime would not disqualify them, or we can send them the resources that they need to figure that out. So there are some movement on that, and the Polk County Public Defender's Office at least has created that position.
So, and if you allow me, Jocelyn, before we go, Shelby and I are trying our hardest to do, if not weekly updates, at least bi-weekly updates. We are on Facebook with it's called Noticias en Movimiento, news on the move, because it's happening really, really dynamically fast, and we put out pieces and advisories in English and Spanish of what is happening nationwide with immigration, but also how anything is affecting Iowa and survivors. So follow us, reach out to us. We'll be glad to do more presentations as things develop, hopefully favorably, right? And work with you in anything that you need. So thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you so much for all that great information. And for advocates, the only thing that I have left is an evaluation. Make sure that you complete that. It'll help us for our future trainings. And thank you so much. You'll receive your certificate in 1 or 2 weeks. So thank you. Have a nice weekend, everyone.
Bye.